What a cool time for your industry. And my premise here is very simple. When I look out at this room, these are the 150 most important people in toll-free, right? You are building, you are the community, you are building this industry. And change, I mean, do you agree with me?
Oh, yeah.
Are you?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Change doesn't happen because one person decides we're going to change the world. We like to think of it that way. We like this Steve Jobs mentality, the Henry Ford mentality, but it doesn't work that way. Change happens because an entire industry decides to change en masse. When Jobs and Apple rolled out iTunes and the iPod, which by the way, they didn't want to create the iPod. They wanted to create iTunes, they wanted to change the music industry, but they couldn't do it by themselves, right? An entire industry had to change, and the same thing applies to you. And the energy I felt last night, the energy I feel today, in listening to Gina and listening to Will and hearing many of you that I spoke with last night, that energy is about community. It's about bringing together the collective capacity to innovate that you all have. And there's a latent innovation. I can feel it's palpable in this room. The question is, how do you bring that to the surface? And you bring that to the surface not through any one person's vision. You bring to the surface by creating a community that enables change, is truly inspired enough to enable change. But the lens you have is a lens that was built in the past. It's not the lens of the future. When we talk about the future, we use the vocabulary of the past to describe it, and that never works. Because the words we use to describe the future are the words of the future, they're not the words of the past. So the question I have to you is, how do you build that lens? How do you get rid of that lens that you take such pride in? Because we all do, I do, you do. It's the lens that we built. We ground that glass by hand, right? This is your lens. But it's the lens of the past. It's not the lens of the future. The good news is that you can pick the behaviors, not just the technology, that will reshape that lens. You can do that. I can do that. It is a conscious choice that we can make, but it's not an easy choice. And I'll show you how difficult it is with a couple of these vignettes as we talk about this today. But a quick question for you, first of all. How many of you believe that everything great has already been invented? That there are no more innovations to be had? That we are at the apex of civilization? We're done. Call it a day. How many of you believe that? Of course not. But what if I were to tell you that although you don't believe it, we behave it. We behave as though all the great stuff has already been invented. Right? Why not? We invented it. We created it. And we lose, because of that, we lose sight of the future. We lose sight of the tremendous power that we have, not in the summation of innovations, because innovation never sums. It always multiplies. It creates behaviors that we never would have anticipated or understood. Aberrant behaviors sometimes. How many of you today, before you even got out of bed, checked your mobile device for email, text, Facebook, before you even stepped one foot? Come on, raise them high, be proud.
All right, yeah.
Come on, right? We're all in the same boat. Better question. How many of you sleep in the same bed with your smartphone on the pillow next to you? Come on. Right, there's the 6 single people in the room right there. Right? That's perverse, is it not? Is that not? I do it. I sleep with this. It's my, this knows more about me than I know about myself. Right, you're giving it away. You're giving away your personhood, your behavior. Google, Facebook, Apple know more about you than your spouse, than your partner, than you do. Are you okay with that? Is that aberrant? That's the future, right? That's what we're living in. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's all bad either. We'll talk about it. But it is what it is, and we are behaving in ways that would have been patently absurd just 10 years ago. Ridiculously absurd 10 years ago. Give me one word, just a word, not a phrase. I don't want a tome, I don't want a paragraph, just one word that answers this question. What words come to mind? How is it that we've shaped the present through the last 200 years of the past? One word, what is it? Behavior, great word. What else? Knowledge, another good word.
Evolution.
Absolutely. All of those, by the way, are contingent upon a much deeper word that I'm thinking of. Yes, sir? Imagination, great word. Adaptation, absolutely. Mobility. Someone say telecom, please. Really? I got to buy the word? I mean, just... Hold that thought. Hold that thought. The word is the steepest trajectory that you could ever illustrate through the entirety of humanity's existence. It is the one thing that answers both how we got here and how we're going to get to wherever we're going to go. It is the one thing that will solve the big problems like climate change. It is the thing that will solve pandemics. It is the thing that will educate the world. It is the thing that will allow 10 billion people to finally all be part of a global community. It's what you do. It's connections. It was on the door coming in. Gina, if I created a word cloud of what you were saying for the last 2 days, connections will be right in the center of that word cloud, right? So here's the kicker. I mean, I talked to Gina, I talked to Will, I talked to some of you leading up to this because I wanted to know more about what you're interested in. But guess what? Connections, I didn't get out of you. Connections is the trajectory that I've been talking about for the last 20 years. It is the most impactful thing that we do. And it's your business. This is what you are doing. You are connecting, not just people, and you'll see this in a minute. You are ultimately the hub that connects so much of the world. You are the customer experience. You are, in many ways, the Internet of Things. And I want to expand that lens, right, the field of view that you have through that lens to understand that it's not what toll-free was in the past. It's a completely different future. And the pivot point is right here, right now. It is a future of abundant connectivity, hyperconnectivity. And I'm going to put numbers on this because I'm a data person. I want to see the numbers because the hyperbole is easy, right? I want to see the numbers. So let me share with you what's going on here. And I'm going to blow your mind. The next 5 minutes, I will crack your brain wide open because these numbers, they're beyond explanation. They're not numbers we can get our heads around, but they're the numbers that we are going to have to live with over the course of the next few decades. And certainly as we move into the next 100 years, this will define our economy. Hyperconnectivity will be the fundamental construct around which we define every economic, social, political reality. So take a look, not too many complex charts here. This is the one complex chart that I want to share with you, but really dig deep and take a look at this. What I'm showing you here on a logarithmic scale, and it's a log scale because if I was to do this in a linear scale, these lines would go up to the clouds. Okay, they would go into the stratosphere. So I've got to do it on a log scale. So what you see here on each of these lines are the various types of computing devices over the course of the last 60 years. Let's start at 1960, right? I was born in 58. I like to believe I was born into the computer revolution, right? That's sort of my era. For many of you, it is as well. So we'll start at 1960 with mainframes, and then with departmental computers. Remember those? And then with PCs, and then with laptops, and then mobility, and now the cloud, of course. Here's what's really cool about this chart. In every single decade, and these are not numbers that anyone debates, this is the trajectory of the past, and it pretty much is the trajectory of the future. In every single decade, the number of user computing devices has increased by 1 order of magnitude. By 1 order of magnitude. And it's as uncanny as Moore's Law. This thing just keeps on going up. So if I were to tell you in 1960 that we would have today 10 billion, which is what we have, 10 billion user computing devices, what would you have said to me in 1960? You smoked too much weed. Thank you. Right. Nice VW minivan bus and get off the weed.
That was him.
Please don't.
We will, by 2100, have 10 to the 21st user computing devices if you follow this trajectory. That is 100 times as many grains of sand as there are on all the world's beaches. Not the deserts, just the beaches. We'll catch up with the deserts eventually, too. So here I am. It's not 1960. I am not smoking weed. There are days when perhaps I might like to, but not. What are you going to say to me? Same thing you would have said back then. This is absurd. Who'll use them? How will they be economically viable? Who's going to manufacture this much stuff? Where will it be? I mean, this will have to be really small stuff. It will be. You'll inhale it. You'll eat it. I was talking to folks in agriculture, specifically dealing with the Internet of Things, several weeks ago, and they were talking to me about bioluminescent plants that will sense a pathogen in a crop and will send a signal to a computing device to tell it the pathogen exists through their bioluminescence. Is that a user computing device? Is the pill that I swallow that's traceable through my system, the mist that I inhale that attaches itself to my neuroreceptors, is all of that a user computing device? It can be. So when we talk about these numbers, we're talking about a pervasiveness that today is unimaginable. Every single day, today, you interact with 243 separate objects that are connected to the Internet of Things. 243. Many of them capturing you through video, others capturing you through sensors. It's already happening. It's there. Your automobile probably has 200 of these sensors already on board. When we talk about hyperconnectivity, the issue in my mind is not just the abundance of these devices, but how they talk to each other and what those connections can create in terms of new value that we never would have thought of. So it, because I can't do that, you can't do that. There is no such thing as a futurist. There are science fiction writers who get it right more often than the rest of us do, right? But the rest of us, we're stuck with surviving the future. So let me share with you how you do that. The first lesson, if you want to understand what that future is going to look like, is to look at the best possible evidence of the behaviors of the future. And it is in how our kids play. It is in how they work today. So my son is 16. When he was 12, he started monetizing his YouTube views, right? At 12, the kid hacked my firewall at home. And if you know what Minecraft is,
Yeah.
right? Parents,
Yeah.
okay? So when Minecraft first became popular, this is Adam when he was about, I don't know, 13, 14. Looks like NORAD, right? Never one screen, right? It's never one screen. It's always at least 3 or 4 screens. Adam's playing Minecraft, and all of a sudden I hear, I'm in my study, and I hear in the other room, Adam saying to his friend, "Jay, you're on the wrong server." I'm thinking, wow, 12-year-old kid knows what a server is. That's pretty cool. So I walk over. I said, "Adam, what's a server?" He said, "It's just a place you go." I said, like the mall? Yeah, we go to different servers. I said, "That's pretty cool. So where is your server located?" "Right there." I said, "The same server I use for the house?" He said, "Yeah." "How did you let kids get on that server?" He goes, "Oh, Dad, I got kids from Russia and from South America and from China, and they're all on my server." I said, "That's really great, but how did you do that?" I hacked the firewall. The Verizon firewall, by the way. Verizon folks, thank you very much. He said, how'd you hack? I couldn't hack the firewall. How'd you hack the firewall? What was his answer, by the way?
It was easy.
How does Adam do anything
He
that's
learned
worth
it
doing
online.
these days?
YouTube.
YouTube. Right. Looked it up on YouTube, Dad.
That's how I figured
And
it out.
then he put up his own video on how to hack my firewall on YouTube, which he monetized. If you want to understand the future, don't figure out the technology. That never works. Because the technology is easy. Try to figure out the behavior. When you talk about toll-free, the thing that amazes me, and I was talking to Paul Faust and I were talking last night. What amazes me is that we talk about customer experience all the time, how incredibly valuable it is, and yet we see customer experience as zero-sum. It's all about the web. It's all about chat. It's all about text. It's all about voice. It's not. It's all about all of the above. It's about seamlessly integrating all of this into one channel. When Adam games, it's about voice. It's about being able to text. It's about being immersed in the game. All this happens at once. That is the nature of the customer experience. It's not just one of these channels. And when Adam games, it's about being social. This is when he used to play on Lego.com. He'd love this. He'd play with real Legos too. But he loved Lego.com. He'd get on with his friends. They would build these contraptions. They would even build their own packaging, by the way, have it shipped to the house. But his thing was he'd be on there for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. Because it was social. It was social to him, right? You're clapping because you're a parent. You know what this is about. Holy shit, this is just the bane of my existence. So Adam was in the attic this is a couple of summers ago. He's in the attic. He'd been gaming for probably, I don't know, 10 hours nonstop. No bathroom breaks, no food, no hygiene, nothing. It's like crack. It's like crack. It really is. Just more readily available, that's all. And I finally had it. It was a beautiful day outside. It was summer vacation. I said, "Adam, get the hell outside. Get some vitamin D. The sun is shining. I'm sure your friends have got to be out there somewhere. Just go outside, please. He said, no. He said, Dad, when you were my age, back before they had computers, he loves to do that. Back before they had computers, what did you do? He said, you know what I did, buddy? I got on my yellow banana seat, sissy bar, swing stingray bike. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. I had one.
God, I wish I had that still. I'd go to the dead-end street with my friends, and I'd stay there all day on the dead-end street, and your grandmother would call me at the end of the day. She didn't care where I was. She knew I was fine. That's what I did all day long. He said, dead-end street, is that like a cul-de-sac, Dad? I said, yeah, it's kind of like a cul-de-sac. He turns to me, and without missing a beat, you can't make this stuff up. I'm not good enough to make this stuff up. He turns to me, without missing a beat, he says, you know what, Dad? Pointing at his computer, this is my cul-de-sac. Wow.
Yeah.
What do you say? As a parent, what do you say? I said, get the hell outside, get some vitamin D.
Right.
This is my cul-de-sac. This is where my friends are. Disconnect me from that? It's like taking the oxygen mask away, right? This is where I socialize. We laugh at it, we say, but they're not learning social skills, they're not connecting with people, they're looking at their palms, not face-to-face. No, that's zero sum. Come on, give it up, stop that. It's not zero sum, it's additive, it's not subtractive. I had ancestors, I like to believe I did, because somewhere in my DNA there's a little bit of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, I think, that stood at the foot of the Acropolis, and they said to each other, and they did have this conversation, we should not reduce the written word, the spoken word to written form. We should not do that. Thank God for Plato, because he disagreed, and we actually know what the hell they talked about, otherwise we never would have. Because to reduce the spoken word to written form was to somehow demean it. It's not zero sum. We tell stories, we write stories. We read e-books, we read regular books. I mean, none of it is zero sum. It's all additive. It all makes the experience richer. When you think about toll-free, think about the breadth and the richness. Don't fight these artificial battles about is it text, is it SMS, is it chat, is it voice, is it a thing, is it a person? It's all of the above, based on your intelligence of understanding the behavior in that specific scenario. And that's what you should be doing, collecting the behavior to understand what channel is appropriate. Right? That's the important stuff, not the technology, it's the behavior. And this behavior is going to get really weird. Okay, second time I'm going to crack your skull open here. Because this data, when we were writing the Gen Z effect, this was the data that really took me by surprise. We didn't make this up. You can go to anyone from the UN to virtually any international body, and you will find these numbers. The Economist just did a big write-up on this a few weeks ago. Right, so we first published, the book came out in November of last year, and this was the cornerstone of the book. We are reversing a 5,000-year trend, a trend that we literally have used to define every social, political, educational institution of humankind for the last 5,000 years, the pyramid. The demographics of the world have been such that we've had a broad base of the pyramid, lots of young kids, and a narrow top, because we all die off. We're not immortal, right? Eventually, we all leave this world. So the pyramid narrows, and it always regresses to this mean of a very classic pyramid shape. There are pandemics, there are wars that kind of make this, modulate a little bit, but by and large, it always regresses to the mean of this pyramid. No longer. I'm going to show you a time lapse from 1950 going to 2100. Watch what happens. Every one of these bands is a 5-year age band. What you see first, that shadow is where we were in 1950. You see the population of the world growing. This is every single geography. This is not just US, North America, G8. This is every geography in the world. No pyramid anymore. Now we have a dome. And eventually, by the year 2100, every single 5-year age band from birth up through age 65 will be separated by less than 2 percentage points of total population. The pyramid is gone. This is immutable. Nothing is going to stop this from happening short of an asteroid hit. Right? This is what the world's going to look like. What does that do to globalization? What does that do to social institutions? What does that do to social welfare, to health care? Think about the impact this will have, because we've built our entire world around this notion of the pyramid. What it does mean, and this is an opportunity that so many of us we ignore because our attention is not brought to focus on it. What it does mean is that we are addressing such a small sliver of the world today with all of these solutions. Stop for a minute and think about that. We've got 7 billion people on the planet. 2 billion generously are part of the economy, quote unquote. 1 billion live on less than $1 a day. 1 billion don't have sanitation. 1 billion don't have health care. The list goes on and on. When all 10 billion, which is the carrying capacity of the planet, if you talk to most folks who study these things, when all 10 billion are finally connected, what does that mean to the world? To how we educate, to how we interact, to how we collaborate. What does that mean to your industry? Affordability is a big piece of this, right? Being able to get the technology into the hands of the 10 billion in some way. And that has become the mission, in many ways, of high tech, is how do we connect the 10 billion people? You're part of that mission. I mean, think about this. Because the opportunity here is so much greater than the opportunities of the past. First of all, we've enabled 2 billion. We've got another 8 billion to go. Huge opportunity there that we're ignoring at our own peril, at our own risk. But so much disruption because of this, because that pyramid has defined every aspect of our world up until now. And that will change. We know it's going to change. Right? It's not a question of when or if even. We know it's going to change, and it's going to change in a way that I think is going to disrupt so much of what we've become accustomed to, what we take for granted in the world around us. Pretty wild stuff, right? So as we move into the future, we're doing it not as 5 or 6 or 7 generations. We're really entering a post-generational world. Because in that skyscraper model that I showed you, as we move away from the pyramid, every one of those 5-year age bands could be a different generation for all intents and purposes. But it's not, and it's not because we all use the same platforms. That's not the past we grew up in. See, what we were accustomed to was going from one technology generation to another, and those technology generations defined what generation you were part of. Right? Ask anyone under 30 what it means to dial a phone. They have no clue. Right? First time I still have my old AT&T, my Bell, actually my Western Bell 500 series phone at home. I refurbished it. It's what a beautiful piece of artwork the thing is. And it still works with a pulse dial system. Go figure, right? My son wanted to use it one day. He said, can I use it? I said, yeah, sure. You just, you dial it. That's why I figured he'd know what it means to dial, right? Picks up the receiver. He's got the dial tone. I said, so stick your finger in the number and just, turn it. So he stuck his finger in the 1 and he turned it. He said, it's not doing anything, Dad. I said, Adam, you got to take your finger out, dude. You got to actually pull it out and let it. He had no idea what it was supposed to do. So we went through these generations of technology from one to the other. It gets better. I got to share this with you. I brought this with me because I had to, at some point, and this is probably as good as any. Anyone got one of these? Plugs into your mobile phone so that you can actually old school, right? This is the way it was meant to be. God made phones because they fit so nicely right there. Am I right? So Adam's a great kid. We have these great conversations all the time. I have wireline phones at home that are cordless, and he is forever losing them, right? In the seat cushions, the battery dies because he's left it under the couch, the dog runs off with it, and I'm always in this case, could you please just put the darn thing back in the cradle? Just put it back in the cradle. That's all you got to do. Not that I get anything other than telemarketing calls on the landline, but. So one day he sees me using this, because I use it all the time. I hang out on the couch and I do this. And he says, Dad, that is so cool. It's like, wow. You know what? And remember when these were like 12 feet long? That was the mobile phone, right? You go around the corner, right, into the closet, so no one could hear you. Mom and Dad wouldn't hear you. Right? That is so cool, Dad. I've got an idea. I said, what is it, buddy? He says, you know how we're always losing the cordless phones around the house? What if you just put one of these on each of the cordless phones? I was like, Adam, that's brilliant. You go for that. That'll pay for your college education. He had no idea. And remember when we used to do this too, to untangle them? Yeah, right. Life was good, man. Life was good. We don't have that difference anymore, generationally. We're all using the same stuff. So, you and I, we took this, most of you and I took this route around, the base of Everest to get up to the top of the peak, and we used all these technologies, and we were our family's customer support, right? And our friends would have us help them install software because we were the experts, and we were proud to be that. It was cool. You were the IT person. You knew this stuff. And then, after making this arduous journey over decades of time, wearing that badge of honor that you had done it, along comes your grandmother, or your mother, or your father, and Skypes on a tablet with the 2-year-old grandson. And you look at it and you say, God, life is not fair. It shouldn't be that easy. It is that easy. Innovation now all happens on a common platform. We're all using the same technologies. We're all collaborating the same way. The notion of how we got here is not the same as that which will bring us into the future. The friction, I love that you use that word, Gina, because the friction that we experienced in technology is dissipating. We are entering a frictionless world. We really are. It's complex, it's sophisticated, it's uncertain, but it will be frictionless. And what you are in this room is an ecosystem that will move through that frictionless world with much greater ease if you choose to do so. So don't use the fact that looking back you were competitors or still are competitors in certain areas to have anything to do with your ability to impact this frictionless future. And I think that's the power in this community, in this group, is that you can choose to do that. And you can choose to do it in some pretty radical and innovative ways from the sounds of it. Slingshotting, how we get there. And these kids, man, they're already there. What is she doing? What's she doing? Yeah.
Reading a magazine.
To her, a magazine is a defective iPad.
Oh,
right?
We're pressing.
Because, and I love this, look at the last frame. Not all of us will get there quite as easily as she does. Not all of us will get there quite as easily as she does.
That's wrong.
In the last frame, that little girl, I wanted to point this out to you, but she was poking her finger into her brilliant kid, right? The deduction being, damn it, the finger is working. It must be the magazine that's broken.
Yeah.
If the world does not respond to me intelligently, take this to heart as an industry. If the world does not respond to me intelligently, it is not worth interacting with. If the service you provide, if that toll-free service does not have intelligence about my behavior, does not have some understanding of what my preferences are, does not direct me and route me and pick the channel that is most appropriate for me given my behaviors, something is wrong with it. It lacks intelligence. And it doesn't mean we take the human being out of the equation, because the most intelligent piece of any network is that human being on the other end of the phone. Right? The people that I do business with are the people that I can actually pick up the damn phone and call. Right? That's customer service. But there are times when I can't do that. There are times when I have to text or when I have to use chat. I just can't talk. Why not understand my behavior well enough to guide me? Show the opposite of brand loyalty, because brand loyalty doesn't exist anymore. What exists are loyal brands. Be loyal to me. Understand my preferences, understand my behaviors. And by doing that, you pull me into the future, willingly into the future. Remember this guy? Yeah, loved watching Maxwell Smart growing up. So I have a subscription to this magazine that my dad gave me years and years ago, Invention and Technology. A couple years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, when the movie first came out, they had this issue of Maxwell Smart on the cover. My daughter saw this on the kitchen table. She looked at it and she said, I know it's funny, I get the story, but why is he using a shoe and not just using a cell phone? And I said, Mia, and by the way, it's not even push button, right? It's rotary. I said, Mia, this is what we thought the future would look like back then. We didn't have cell phones. This is what we thought, cell phones would look like. And we weren't that far off, right? Because early 1980s, Motorola brick, it was basically the size of a shoe, correct? So I've got a question for you. When Motorola first introduced this, 1983, how many of you had one, by the way? How many had a brick? Right, about $3 or $4 grand you paid for it, and you were proud to have it, right? It was a pretty cool gadget at that. It was the gadget at that point in time. You probably had like one friend that maybe you could talk to if you were lucky. You also had one. What was the projection for the total number of mobile phones, not smartphones, not Motorola, just total number of mobile phones that would be in existence in 2000? What was the projection in 1983 for that number? What was the projection? 1 million, someone says. 400 million, someone says. So the bell curve, The bell curve was from 10,000 to 10 million. Those were the projections at the time. How many cell phones do we have in service today? 7 billion. Take a look at this and see how awful we are at predicting the future. These were commercials that ran. I'm not going to tell you when just yet. I want you to think, when did these commercials run? Because what you're seeing here are e-books. You're seeing GPS, such a prescient view of the future. Send the facts from the beach, using the language of the past to describe the future, right? But you saw a tablet there, right? That was an iPad, basically. You're seeing electronic medical records here. What year did AT&T air these commercials? What year was it? We thought this was the George Jetson distant future, right? WebEx. What year was it? What do you think?
Something. It's the 80s.
Someone says 90, someone says 80, 86, someone says. You saw Netflix just a minute ago, right? Incredibly prescient. AT&T knew exactly what the future would look like in 1993. Wow. That's what those commercials are. And it is exactly what you're living today. Exactly what you're living today. So here's the question. If AT&T got the future so well, was so prescient, was so correct, why the hell didn't they bring a single one of these products to market? Not one. How does that happen? How does that happen? There's an answer, by the way, and it's the same answer that Kodak would give if you asked them, how do you invent digital photography and get bankrupted by it? Because you're protecting the turf of the past. And as we move forward, the level of uncertainty involved in identifying the opportunities, the behavioral opportunities of the future, is only going to increase. Right? The complexity of these many interwoven channels of technology that we use, the many different ways that we'll communicate, the increased volume of connections, the increased volume of humanity's activity through these connections, the Internet of Things, all of this will heighten the amount of uncertainty. And that uncertainty will exist for very brief moments of time, but so will the opportunity. So will the opportunity. And that's part of what defines this frictionless future. So in 1998, I had begun a relationship with Peter Drucker for the last about 15 years till he passed away. My very first meeting with him, I asked him to describe to me what had changed most over the course of his lifetime. And what you're seeing here is basically a back-of-the-napkin rendition of that conversation. We've moved from anonymous marketplaces where we didn't know the buyer, Henry Ford, any color you want as long as it's black, I don't care what your preferences are, right? To a behavioral market where your value as a provider of any service, of any product, is how well you know and get me. How well do you understand my preferences? The better you do that, the more likely I am to be loyal to you because you're being loyal to me. And we've moved from single providers, Ford owned the entire supply chain. Gina, you talked about supply chains and the complexity. There was no supply chain back then. It was all under one roof. To an ecosystem model where everything is held together with these very tenuous, temporary, short-term connections and touch points. That upper right-hand quadrant is where you live. How are you adapting to an ecosystem model? And how are you capturing and leveraging behavior? And that, to me, that's the beauty of the cloud, is that it allows us to do that. It allows us to capture that information somehow. And the more you move to mechanisms, to content that has rich text and voice and conversations, the more likely you are to be able to capture that. It's why Google is giving away Gmail. I mean, do you realize the intimate details of your life that you are sharing with Google by using Gmail? Because the content is rich. So the more I understand you, the more I can build this ecosystem around you. And there are industries where this is being done. There's a company called E2Open in manufacturing, which actually hovers over supply chains and reconfigures the supply chain without any human intervention to meet the current needs of the marketplace. It shapes the product and the innovation based on the needs of the market without any human intervention. That's an ecosystem view of the world. That's the kind of frictionless future that it's crazy, right? But that's the world that we're entering. That's where you'll be doing business. The question is, how do you enable that? How do you help that? How do you create value for folks who exist in that world? Your questions to answer, not mine, right? Your questions to answer, but they're the questions that need to be asked. And as you do that, keep in mind that we are all very frail when it comes to seeing these patterns emerge. Right? The background noise of uncertainty makes it so difficult to recognize these patterns. But the patterns are there. And I'm going to prove to you how quickly we get stuck on these patterns, how quickly we get stuck on them and develop this inability to move forward. And as a result, to see the new patterns that are emerging. Kodak literally invented digital photography. They invented it in their lab. And yet they went bankrupt because they couldn't leverage it. Because it was all about film. Film was the pattern. You keep improving that pattern. You keep, the girls going clockwise, keep making the girl go clockwise. And we can do that. We're the gorilla. We can make the world believe in film again by changing film, by enhancing it. No way. No way. Because when an industry starts to shift, it doesn't matter how big the gorilla is. Eventually they'll succumb. And here's what's essential to understand is that the time you've got to change the pattern to recognize the new one is getting smaller and smaller. So as uncertainty increases, as opportunity also increases, the velocity of both tend to go hand in hand, you've got less and less time to react. So a big part of what you are providing as a value in your service is allowing me to keep up with that time to react. Whether I'm the customer or whether I'm the provider, being able to make that connection in that instantaneous moment, in that exact instant when I need it, is critical to creating value. Whatever channel that happens to be. This notion of the uncertainty principle governs so much of the value that we create as organizations going forward. And it's going to keep happening, right? The time we have to react is going to keep getting less and less and less. And it creates a toll. It takes a toll on us as human beings. But the alternative is to provide tools that will help. And here's, by the way, because at some point you can't react anymore as a human being, right? You need an algorithm to do it for you. So there are 4 eras or forms of disruption. And we're seeing all 4 of them happen right now. And I'll use the iPod as sort of the example because we're all familiar with that. But the first era is digitization, where we digitize stuff. So there our fascination is with the device, right? The first iPod, how cool is it? That little touch wheel. Remember, it was just very neat to have the device. And then the second disruptor was the music industry being disrupted by the content being digitized and made available in digital form. But then we started to move to third and fourth derivatives of this disruption. The third derivative was creating personalized playlists that were behavioral, that understood me. Spotify is a good example of that. Pandora, right? Apple Radio, create song lists that conform to my interests. You should be able to do that, by behaviors. But what's the fourth disruptor, which is where we're going right now? It's the predictive disruptor. Tell me what I like before I even know I like it. Right? Create content just for me. Gina and I were talking about cable TV. I cut the cord about a year or so ago. It just didn't make any sense anymore. My son just watches YouTube, Apple TV, Netflix. He doesn't watch anything on cable any longer. So I cut the cable. But it brought to mind one of my favorite quotes, a Nicholas Negroponte quote, which was, in the future, we will not have 500 channels of TV. We will have one channel, your channel. My channel. That's where we are right now, right? That's the datafication of the world. That's the pivot point. We're moving from the digital world to the datafied world. The more I understand that behavior, the more I can capture that behavior, the more value I can deliver. Personalized, customized value. That values you as an individual, because that's what we want. We want to be valued for who we are. The more you do that for me, the more I then value you as a provider of a service. Pretty cool stuff, right? It's a different way to look at the world. It's reshaping that lens ever so slightly, but it is reshaping it. It's reshaping it in ways that I think are, especially for you, incredibly important. There's lots of examples out there, and we don't have the time to go through many of them, but I'll give you one sort of an analogy that's really cool. Look at the way OnStar has datafied the experience of onboard telematics. So OnStar began, I remember talking to Chet Huber when they were first rolling this out. Chet used to run the division at GM that was OnStar, no longer does, he's left since then. But when they first rolled this out, they had no idea what it was going to do. And over time, they collected more and more information of drivers' patterns of behavior. And they finally got to the point, they haven't rolled this out yet, but they've thought about it quite seriously. Today, if you're in an accident, OnStar knows all of the forces involved so well, the accelerations, the decelerations so well. They know that location where you had the accident because they've got prior empirical data about that same location. They know your driving behaviors well enough They know the weather conditions, and they know the local services provided, emergency services provided, that they can actually predictively identify what your injuries are going to be and route you to the correct trauma center. And one of the cool things, and Chet, I never would have figured this out on my own, Chet said, one of the cool things, perversely cool things about modern automobiles is that because of all the airbags, you don't sustain the telltale bruising to indicate what's going on internally. OnStar can tell you better than an X-ray or a CAT scan what most likely is going on internally before you even get to the hospital. That's datafication, right? It's not digitizing, it's creating knowledge from the data, vast volumes of it. You're collecting those vast volumes right now. That's so much of what you do. What are you doing with it? What are you doing with it? I mean, that's the only answer that's worth answering, right? Because we figured out how to collect it. The question is, what do you do with it next? You're trading on behavior. This has become the commodity of the future. We are the most valuable asset. You and I and our behavior is the most valuable asset. And you are the conduit. You create the receptacle for so much of where this behavior is captured. What are you doing with it? Your question to answer. Again, I would never be presumptive enough to answer it for you. I will tell you this. That is, I look generationally at these kids and how they behave. I am both awestruck, I am humbled, and thirdly, I'm a bit embarrassed. Because I ask myself, what was I doing in middle school at their age? A couple of the kids that we interviewed for the book that were just beyond inspiring and really caused me to wonder what the hell I had done with my life and how much I had wasted prior to figuring out what I wanted to do when I grew up. Life hacking is that ability to have the confidence in knowing that you can somehow influence change without necessarily having access to capital or other resources, but only access to community. Life hackers, and this is not the malicious hackers, these are the folks that say, you know what, it shouldn't be done this way. There's an easier way to do it. There's a more effective way to do it. There's a better way to do it. There's a way that benefits mankind better. So one of the kids that we talked to was Shuman Mulmudi. Shuman grew up in a household of docs. His dad was a cardiologist. His mom was a doc as well. At the dinner table, they would talk about cardiology and those kinds of things. And Shuman said to himself at the ripe old age of 13, you know what? I think I'm going to use that new 3D printer that the school just got, and I'm going to build a stethoscope with it. What he built was a case that goes on an iPhone, printed entirely with a 3D printer, a bit of software, and this case can pick up low-frequency heart sounds that are indicative of certain conditions that can be life-threatening. The same sounds could only be picked up by being in a clinic or in a hospital and using hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Shuman, with about $3 worth of plastic, built this case. What the hell were you doing in middle school? Think about it. He took this to market. He's built a company around this and actually marketing it now. Pretty cool stuff. This next one is even cooler. Easton LaChapelle, also in middle school, loved to play with Legos, as did my son Adam and probably lots of your kids and maybe you yourself. And he began building prosthetics with Legos. And then he moved on to printing them with 3D printers. And Easton eventually, when he was in high school, created prosthetic limbs, like the one you see here, that have an amazing ability to articulate, sensitivity, can pick up an egg or a cup or whatever. And Easton did something really cool. Number one, for $800 you could buy this, whereas it would cost $80,000 to buy it commercially. But what Easton did, which was really cool, is he open sourced it. He refused to patent it. And when we talked to Easton, we said, you know, why'd you do that? Don't you see value in protecting the intellectual property? And his response was, no, it wasn't a question of why would I protect it? It was a question of how could I protect it? The world can benefit from this. I mean, Gina, what you did with Beth today was incredibly touching and inspiring. 70,000 kids, really, a day and a half at Disney World? Easton's comment to that would be, how can you live with that? Yeah, it's a great number. Are you going to tweet it or are you going to do something about it? And his response to us was, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't open source this. But, and here comes the even better part, but why does that mean I can't build a business around it? Why does that mean that I can't make money doing this as well? Can't you do both? So we grew up in a world of limitations. We grew up in a world where it had to be zero sum, where to give you had to take, where to negotiate you couldn't both win, right? Someone had to lose. In Easton's world, it's not zero sum. It's all additive. It's a world of abundance, not a world that's constrained by resources, but a world that is abundant in resources because the resources are digital. I can give it away. And if I give it away, I can make the next thing faster, and patenting it just slows me down. An entirely different ethos, right? A different way to look at the world, so different than the way we looked at it. And it's part of what these kids bring to the world. They bring this quest for meaning with them. And when boomers slam millennials, you know, it's disturbing because, you know, boomers grew up trying to be idealists and make the world a better place. The problem was they didn't have the tools to do it. Right? This generation does. Right? It's why the Arab Spring happened. The Arab Spring was organized over the course of 3 days. Right? The march on D.C., Martin Luther King March on D.C., took months to organize. Right? Affluence is a form of capital. It is a way to influence the world, and these kids understand it, and we could learn a thing or two from watching them and people like Easton navigate this new world, both monetize it and change it at the same time in pretty dramatic ways. So the possibilities here are absolutely limitless. Where you take this industry is entirely up to you, of course, not up to me. I'm just trying to give you a sense here for some of the dynamics that are going to shape that conversation for you. These kids don't want to work alone. They want to collaborate because it's the only way they know to work. Adam only knows how to collaborate. My daughter Mia, God bless her, she's now 21, but when she was 16, she had her first boyfriend, Ryan. Great kid, loved him. You know, every dad's nightmare, first boyfriend, but Ryan was awesome. One problem with Ryan, just one. Ryan moved in with us and lived in our house for an entire year. Not kidding. On Skype. I'd walk into Mia's room. Always, the computer would be open, there would be Ryan's face. Hey Ryan, hey Mr. K. This will go on 24/7. And they would leave the computers on all the time. So at night, this sounds really weird and perverse, but it was totally harmless. They would virtually sleep together, right? Ryan would be on the pillow next to her. Because that's what they knew, right? You know, I'd hear him snoring at night when I'd walk by her room. That was what they knew, always connected. It's not isolated just to Gen Z or just to millennials. We've been seeing this happen for a while now. If you go back to the Nobel Prizes in the physical sciences, in the first half of the last century, almost exclusively to individuals. Second half, half and half to individuals and teams. Going forward, only to teams because they only know how to collaborate. They don't know how to do things alone. They want to collaborate because that is the nature of their behavior. That is the way the tapestry of their world is woven. They only know how to collaborate. As a result, IP, who needs it? Maybe there are some areas where it makes sense to protect, but in a lot of areas it only inhibits us, it only slows us down. Right? This is a trend line that's been happening for a long time. We're seeing it culminate, we're seeing that elbow of the J curve right now, but it's been brewing for a very, very long time. It's not just about the internet, it's not just about what's happened in the last 5-10 years, it's not just about mobility, it is about a behavioral trend that's been in the making for a long, long time. And when we say 5 generations, 6, 7, 8, I don't know what the right number is. What I do know is it doesn't make sense to track them anymore because we're all working longer. Right? Kids are entering the workforce at 10 or 12 because some of the most successful YouTubers are kids that are, you know, barely able to tie their shoelaces at this point, but yet are able to do unpackaging on the internet and monetize that. And at the other end, you've got folks who are 70, 80, 90 who don't want to retire because they don't need to. Right? How many of you completely, totally are going to unplug at some golden age and just not be at all part of the rest of the world? Just live on your insular Tahiti. How many? Yeah. Because you don't have to. You could be on that Tahiti and still be on the internet. Maybe 3 hours a day, maybe 3 hours a week, but you don't have to unplug. So we live longer, and we live longer, right? And we work longer, both. And what's funny is if you look at the 2 trend lines, this is real math, by the way. I got to clean this up to actually show the real graph because we did this as a joke once, and we went back and looked at the data, and the data does actually prove this. In 2100, life expectancy will be approaching, clearly, globally, that magic number of 100. But Work life expectancy will also be increasing. And what will happen in 2100 is that the two lines will intersect. What does this say to you? Work life expectancy exceeds life expectancy. Right, you're working after you're dead. Serious shit. You're working after you're dead. You can buy apps right now, by the way, for Facebook, for Twitter. They'll keep posting for you after you've departed this life. Right? If you're interested in doing that, they'll look at the patterns of behavior and they'll keep posting for you and tweeting for you. I have deceased friends that come up on my Facebook page all the time. Right? I'm at that age where it happens. One day, I'm waiting for one of them to post another dead friend's Facebook page. That'll be really kind of weird. This is the world that we're moving into. A world where generations don't make any sense anymore, where collaboration in the extreme becomes the way that we cut across those generational divides. And the last thing that you'll have to have in this organization of the future to allow all of this change to happen, to give license to innovation, is the one thing that's always been at the heart of any great organization. And I'll show you that with this very simple clip of the Titanic and that ill-fated voyage that, at this point right now, when they spot the iceberg, takes this horrible twist for the worse, and a million things go wrong up until this point. But you know what's cool? They did almost everything right once they saw the iceberg, almost, except for one thing. So you could say the slag and the rivets was low-quality iron, and as a result, the bulkheads gave way. The bulkheads should have been higher, perhaps. There should have been more lifeboats. You can make all kinds of arguments, but up until that point, all the mistakes that happened could still have averted that catastrophe if the right corrective action had been taken, because the behavior of the vessel was very different than any other vessel. The Titanic had 3 screws, and right there, when they put the engines into full astern, they reversed the engines basically, they put all 3 screws into full astern. You could pivot this ship on a dime. That was the magic of this vessel, is you could pivot it on a dime by oscillating the screws. If you've driven a boat with 2 engines, you know what that means, but you could pivot this thing. They didn't. Their behavior was not appropriate for the technologies that they had at hand. Don't worry about any of that. That's really not the point I was trying to make. All I want you to do is take a look at the eyes of the first officer, right? Why isn't she turning? Well, because, what you're doing is behaving the way you should have behaved in the past, but not the way you should be behaving in the future. But you see that look of fear, uncertainty, doubt? If you ever see that look in the eyes of leadership, get the hell off the boat. Because none of this happens. None of this happens if leadership doesn't allow it to happen. If leadership doesn't allow failure, doesn't allow experimentation, doesn't allow you to build that future one step at a time, it'll always take you by surprise. The more that leadership goes on to the past, the less likely any organization is to make it in the future. So tell me, I asked you this question at the very beginning. So who was it that said everything great had already been invented? Charles Duell, Commissioner of the Patent and Trademark Office, circa 1899. Pretty wild, huh? Supreme arrogance. We don't believe it, and yet we behave it. Your job is not just to shape technology, it is to understand and to shape behavior. That's the task that you have in front of you. And as a community, as an industry, I think you have enormous opportunity to do that. And I wish you all the success with it. Welcome to Gen Z, and thank you so much for having me.
Pretty good.
Yeah.